The early morning at Central City Transit Station was busy with travelers hurrying to catch their trains and buses. Officer Darren Collins strode through the bustling terminal with an air of self-importance. Known for his rigid views and harsh treatment of anyone who did not fit his narrow idea of proper behavior, Officer Collins had developed a reputation for aggression. Today, his focus was drawn to a scene that would change everything. At a crowded coffee kiosk near the waiting area, Denise Harper, a composed and dignified black woman in her late 30s, patiently waited for her order. Denise was dressed in smart professional attire, her eyes calm yet alert, and her presence radiated quiet authority. As she reached for her cup of steaming coffee, Officer Collins, fueled by baseless prejudice and a desire to assert his control, suddenly approached her. Without any warning or explanation, he seized the cup and hurled it at her with a force that sent scalding liquid splattering across her face and clothes. The sound of the thrown coffee cut through the ambient chatter of the station. Shock rippled through the small crowd that had gathered. Denise staggered back, her expression a mix of pain and disbelief as gasps of outrage filled the air. The act was not only violent but deeply personal. It was an assault fueled by racism, and it stunned everyone who witnessed it. Officer Collins, his face twisted in a mixture of anger and self-satisfaction, barked, "You do not belong here," as if his words could justify his actions. For a few heartbeats, time seemed to slow down. The viewers of this incident, whether present at the scene or watching later on social media, were left wondering what could drive a man to such cruelty. Denise, though momentarily stunned by the pain, stood her ground with a dignity that belied the shock of the moment. The air was thick with tension and a rising sense of inevitability. There was an information gap that made everyone ask, why would a law enforcement officer commit such a reprehensible act? And what would happen next when the truth came to light? Little did Officer Collins know, the events of this day were only beginning. What started as a racist, impulsive act was about to take an unexpected twist, one that would shatter his self-assured world and leave him reeling in regret. In that charged moment, the seeds of transformation were sown. The stage was set for a dramatic reversal of power and authority, and the viewer was left with a burning question. How could this injustice possibly end without repercussions? The promise of an explosive turnaround hung in the air, urging everyone to stay tuned for the shocking revelation that was just around the corner. Before we go any further, subscribe to the channel and comment below where you are watching from. For our returning subscribers, thank you so much for your unwavering support. It truly means a lot to our community. Central City Transit Station was not only a hub for daily commuters, but also a symbol of urban life and diversity. The station was modern, with clean lines, digital information boards, and a constant flow of people from all walks of life. It was a place where cultures intertwined and where the promise of opportunity met the challenges of a fast-paced world. Officer Darren Collins had been with the Central City Police Department for over 15 years. His uniform was always immaculate, his posture rigid, and his demeanor one of stern authority. Over the years, his actions had earned him a reputation both feared and criticized. Many of his colleagues whispered that he held views that were relics of a bygone era, views that painted him as intolerant and unyielding. His approach to law enforcement was simplistic. Those who did not conform to his idea of order were seen as problems that needed to be eliminated. In his mind, his duty was to maintain control, even if it meant acting on his own prejudices. In stark contrast stood Denise Harper. Denise was a well-respected administrative manager at a large corporation and a community advocate known for her calm strength and unwavering integrity. Having grown up in a neighborhood where she had to fight for every opportunity, Denise had learned early in life that true power lay not in brute force, but in perseverance, intelligence, and compassion. Dressed in a smart blazer and skirt, her style was professional yet approachable. Her dark eyes reflected both the pain of past injustices and the hope of a better future. Denise was not only a survivor of systemic discrimination, but also an inspiration to many who knew her. The transit station itself was a living canvas of urban life. Large digital screens displayed real-time updates of train arrivals and departures, while colorful murals on the walls celebrated the city's rich cultural heritage. People bustled about with purpose, students, professionals, families, each with their own story. Yet, within this vibrant setting, an incident of cruelty was about to unfold that would expose the dark underbelly of prejudice even in a modern metropolis. On that fateful morning, as people hurried through the terminal, Denise's calm presence provided a stark contrast to the chaos of everyday life. Her routine was simple: pick up a cup of coffee, check her emails on her smartphone, and then head to work. But that day, her routine was shattered by the sudden act of violence from Officer Collins. The confrontation between an arrogant officer and a dignified woman was a collision of two very different worlds. The old world of unchecked bias and the new world where strength, resilience, and respect for diversity were finally taking hold. As the crowd reacted with shock and anger, whispers of disbelief circulated among the onlookers. Many remembered similar incidents from the past and began to wonder if the system that allowed such acts to occur was truly in need of reform. The stage was set for a dramatic turn of events that would not only challenge Officer Collins's authority, but also redefine what it meant to serve and protect in a society that was slowly awakening to the need for equality. In the wake of the assault, the immediate aftermath was chaotic. Witnesses rushed to help Denise, who, despite her pain, managed to maintain her composure. Emergency services were called, and the incident quickly escalated into a full-blown controversy. Officer Collins stood at the center of the commotion, still seething and insisting that his actions were justified. He claimed that he had seen something suspicious in Denise's behavior, a claim that was met with incredulity by everyone present. As news of the incident spread rapidly through the transit station and beyond, questions began to mount. Why had Officer Collins targeted Denise so aggressively? What had prompted him to throw the hot coffee in the first place? Rumors started to swirl, and soon, the Internal Affairs Division of the police department became involved. Preliminary reviews of Collins's record revealed a troubling pattern of similar instances where his actions had been driven by personal bias rather than any real threat. Within hours, several officers who had once admired Collins now expressed doubts about his judgment. In a tense meeting in a nearby office, senior officers discussed the incident and the mounting evidence against him. It appears that his actions are not isolated, one officer remarked. There is a pattern here that we cannot ignore. These whispers of concern soon grew into an internal debate about accountability and the need for a thorough investigation. Meanwhile, Denise was taken to a nearby medical center for treatment. Despite the physical pain, her spirit remained unbroken. In interviews with onlookers, she calmly recounted her version of events, insisting that she had been minding her own business. Her testimony, delivered with quiet strength, contrasted sharply with Collins's aggressive account. Legal representatives for Denise began preparing for a case that would challenge not only the officer's behavior, but also the systemic issues that allowed such incidents to occur. Back at the transit station, the atmosphere was charged with tension. Passengers and employees alike discussed the incident in hushed tones, their expressions a mix of anger and concern. Some posted videos and photos on social media, and hashtags demanding justice for Denise quickly began trending. The public outcry reached the local news, and soon, the incident was being reported on television and online platforms. Every new detail that emerged added to the growing suspicion that Officer Collins had acted out of racism rather than genuine concern for security. The mounting conflict was further intensified when a respected civil rights advocate, who happened to be at the station that morning, stepped forward to speak out against the injustice. In a brief statement to a local news crew, the advocate declared, "This is not an isolated act. It is part of a broader pattern of racial bias in our law enforcement system." Such statements fueled the fire, and calls for a complete review of the department's practices became louder. Inside the police department, internal memos began to circulate, pointing to previous complaints about Officer Collins's conduct. A junior officer, after reviewing the records, approached a supervisor and said, There are clear signs that his actions today are not new. We must do something before this escalates any further. The pressure was mounting on the department to address not only the incident at the transit station, but also the systemic issues that allowed an officer to act with such unchecked prejudice. By the end of the day, the conflict had grown from an isolated incident to a major controversy. The evidence against Officer Collins was mounting, and the public was demanding accountability. The stage was set for a showdown that would force the entire community to confront the realities of racism and the need for systemic reform. Every whispered conversation, every shared photo and video, and every statement made by supporters of Denise contributed to an atmosphere of heightened anticipation. The battle lines were drawn, and the community braced itself for the dramatic turning point that was inevitable. As the investigation into the incident continued, the tension at Central City Transit Station and within the police department escalated to unprecedented levels. Internal reviews of Officer Collins's record revealed further instances of similar behavior, each one echoing the same underlying bias. Officers who had once worked alongside Collins now began to distance themselves, voicing their concerns in quiet but determined tones. The media picked up on the story, and soon, local news channels were broadcasting footage of the incident, along with interviews from witnesses and community leaders demanding justice. Within the police department, the internal affairs team, led by Lieutenant Marcus Daniels, a man known for his fairness and commitment to accountability, opened a formal investigation. Lieutenant Daniels was determined to get to the truth, and his presence brought a new level of seriousness to the case. In a series of meetings with his senior officers, Daniels laid out the evidence, pointing to technical logs, witness testimonies, and past disciplinary records that painted a clear picture of Officer Collins's recurring misconduct. At the same time, the public response was growing louder. Social media exploded with hashtags such as #JusticeForDenise and #NoMoreBias. Videos of the incident were viewed millions of times, and the outrage spread quickly across the city. Community meetings were held in local neighborhoods, where residents demanded that the police department be held accountable for its actions. Many citizens, particularly those who had experienced similar injustices, saw this incident as the breaking point, a moment when the old guard of biased authority would finally be forced to change. The tension was not confined solely to the public sphere. It permeated every corner of the police department as well. Some officers, inspired by Lieutenant Daniels' leadership, began to speak out about the need for reform. "We must hold ourselves to a higher standard," one officer said during a closed-door meeting. "If we allow prejudice to influence our actions, we fail every citizen we are sworn to protect." His words, though spoken quietly, resonated with many in the room. In the midst of the escalating conflict, a young reporter from a local news station obtained exclusive access to internal emails that revealed discussions about Officer Collins's past behavior. The email showed that complaints had been filed against him multiple times, but they had been ignored or brushed aside by higher-ups. This evidence further intensified the public demand for accountability. The story took on national significance as news outlets across the country began to report on the incident, urging the police department to take swift and meaningful action. Back at the transit station, the atmosphere was charged with energy. A makeshift press area had been set up, and reporters peppered Lieutenant Daniels with questions. Daniels, speaking calmly but firmly, promised that no stone would be left unturned in the investigation. "Our goal is to restore trust," he declared. "We cannot allow personal bias to undermine our duty to serve the community." His words were met with a mixture of relief and cautious optimism by those in attendance. Meanwhile, Denise Harper, who had become the face of the incident, was slowly recovering at a nearby medical center. Though she had suffered burns and emotional trauma, her resolve remained unbroken. In interviews given from her hospital room, Denise stated, "I have always believed in fairness and in the power of truth. I will not let this injustice define me." Her brave words further fueled the movement for change, and her calm, dignified manner contrasted sharply with the aggressive behavior of Officer Collins. As the investigation progressed, Lieutenant Daniels called for additional witness testimonies. Soldiers, fellow officers, and even everyday commuters who had been present at the scene came forward to share their accounts. Their statements consistently contradicted Officer Collins's version of events. A pattern emerged. The evidence showed that Collins had not only acted rashly on that fateful morning, but that his behavior was part of a larger trend of racial bias. The tension in the control room, the press area, and within the police department grew to a fever pitch. Every new piece of evidence, every additional testimony, further eroded the credibility of Officer Collins. The internal review, now supported by a groundswell of public pressure, promised a sweeping reevaluation of departmental practices. It was clear that this was not just an isolated incident, but a turning point for the entire institution. By the time Lieutenant Daniels concluded his briefing for the day, the entire community, both inside and outside the police department, felt that a decisive change was inevitable. The rising tension had exposed deep flaws in the system and had galvanized a movement demanding justice, fairness, and accountability. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation, and everyone present understood that the forthcoming actions would set a new standard for what was acceptable in law enforcement. The defining moment came on a brisk afternoon when the investigation reached its peak. The courtroom-like setting of the transit station security office was filled with officers, senior administrators, and community representatives. Lieutenant Marcus Daniels took the stage to deliver the final verdict of the internal review. With a steady voice that carried the weight of responsibility, he declared, "After a thorough examination of all evidence, it is clear that Officer Collins's actions were driven solely by personal bias and unfounded suspicion. This behavior is unacceptable and cannot stand in our community." A heavy silence fell over the room. Officer Collins, who had stood at the center of the controversy, now looked visibly shaken. His once confident demeanor had evaporated, replaced by a mix of shock and regret. Lieutenant Daniels continued, "Effective immediately, Officer Collins is relieved of his duties pending a full disciplinary review. This decision is not only a correction of one incident, but a firm message that our system will not tolerate prejudice." In that moment, Denise Harper, who had become a symbol of strength throughout the ordeal, stepped forward. With quiet dignity, she spoke into the microphone, her voice clear and unwavering. "I have always believed in justice and in the power of truth," she said. "Today we have witnessed that no one is above accountability. Let this be a turning point for all of us, a moment where we reject hate and embrace fairness." Her words resonated deeply with everyone present, stirring a wave of approval that rippled through the crowd. The turning point was sealed when Lieutenant Daniels introduced additional documentation, internal memos, technical logs, and eyewitness testimonies that incontrovertibly proved that Officer Collins had acted out of racial prejudice. The evidence was so compelling that even those who had once supported him could no longer stand by silently. In that charged atmosphere, the power dynamics shifted irrevocably. The man who had tried to assert his authority through hate was now forced to confront the full consequences of his actions. The announcement sparked immediate reactions. Many community members who had gathered to witness the review erupted in applause and cheers, their faces alight with relief and hope. The news spread quickly throughout Central City, and within minutes, the incident became a rallying cry for change in law enforcement. For the first time in a long while, it seemed that the values of fairness and accountability were truly being upheld. Officer Collins, now standing before his colleagues with his defenses in ruins, could only watch in silence. The evidence had spoken for itself, and the reality of his misconduct was laid bare for all to see. In that moment, the entire system, once complicit in ignoring personal biases, had taken a definitive stand against injustice. The turning point had arrived, and the promise of reform shone bright in the eyes of everyone present. In the days following the dramatic verdict, Central City underwent a period of reflection and transformation. The news of Officer Collins's removal from duty and the sweeping internal review led by Lieutenant Daniels spread like wildfire. The incident, which had shocked the community, soon became a symbol of hope and a catalyst for meaningful change within the police department. Denise Harper, though still recovering from her injuries, emerged as a powerful voice for justice. She held several community meetings, sharing her story and advocating for systemic reform. Her message was simple yet profound. No one should be subjected to prejudice, and every person deserved to be treated with respect and dignity. Her strength in the face of adversity inspired many, and her testimony became a rallying point for civil rights groups and concerned citizens alike. Lieutenant Daniels wasted no time in implementing the promised reforms. Over the next few weeks, he introduced new training programs focusing on cultural sensitivity and unbiased policing. The department began reviewing its disciplinary protocols, ensuring that any deviation from ethical standards would be met with swift action. Daniels made it clear that the days of unchecked bias were over, and his leadership ushered in a renewed commitment to accountability and transparency. Officer Collins, now on administrative leave pending further investigation, became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that even those who have long held positions of authority are not immune to scrutiny. His case was widely covered by local media, and public outcry ensured that his actions would not be forgotten. While his future remained uncertain, the incident served as a turning point for the entire force. The community at Central City embraced the changes with cautious optimism. Public forums, town hall meetings, and community outreach programs sprang up, all aimed at bridging the gap between law enforcement and the citizens they served. Social media campaigns and local news segments highlighted the importance of holding every officer to the highest standard of conduct, and the message of accountability resonated across the city. In one final community gathering held in the courtyard outside Central City Transit Station, Lieutenant Daniels addressed a diverse crowd of residents, officers, and community leaders. "Today, we stand at the crossroads of change," he declared, his voice filled with hope and determination. "We have witnessed that no one is above the law and that the power of truth will always prevail. Let this be the beginning of a new era, one where respect, fairness, and accountability guide our every action." The crowd responded with enthusiastic applause, and the air was filled with a sense of unity and renewed purpose. As the meeting drew to a close and the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the city, a palpable sense of optimism lingered. The painful lessons of that fateful day had ignited a movement for reform that promised to reshape not only the police department, but the entire community. Central City was now on the path to becoming a place where every individual, regardless of background, was treated with the respect they deserved. The legacy of the incident and the courageous stand taken by those who fought against prejudice became a beacon for others. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the light of accountability and truth could pave the way for a brighter, more inclusive future. For Denise Harper, Lieutenant Daniels, and all who had stood up against injustice, the journey toward reform was just beginning. And as Central City moved forward, the promise of lasting change served as a powerful testament to the strength of community and the enduring power of justice.